Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth Episode 9, Bitter Work. This episode is animated by DR Movie. And so this is the episode where Aang learns earthbending. He begins his earthbending and by the end of the episode is on track with his training. With the big thing being that earthbending is somewhat of a challenge to him, because it requires him to approach with a philosophy that's extremely different, the opposite of his usual approach, which is very classic airbender, which is avoid and evade in battle, and it's very different here what he has to do. It's the most obvious comparison is go back to episode 5 and his fight with Bumi, and Bumi's analysis of their fight there. It's not to say that Aang is wrong or his tactics are bad, in that he eventually, gets into that fight and does quite well. But in this case, Aang actually trying to learn Earth, he has to approach it with somewhat of the mentality of an Earthbender. And then on the other side of the episode, we also have, Iroh's injury is kind of revealed to, okay, he's going to take a little bit of time to recover from it. But for the most part, this was a way to bring the two back together. And now Zuko wants to begin his training again. And they immediately approach, can Zuko learn to generate lightning? Iroh's revealed to be able to do it, and then we transition into lightning redirection, plus I suppose Zuko beginning to realize the importance of taking on basically aspects of the other nations. Just like Aang as the Avatar is kind of forced to do that, to learn his other elements. Zuko, just to become a more complete person, has to also kind of understand the importance of learning from the other nations. So, it's overall an episode where I think it's good. It's a pretty good episode, but at the same time, this is one of the more notable steps in the journey, Aang finally learning earthbending. And I don't know if, this specific incident was big enough to be oh yeah, this was the big moment where Aang learned earthbending. I like the dynamic they approached with, in the end, Toph kind of forcing Aang into a position where she just wanted to, almost more so than him about earthbending, she wanted to see mentally if Aang could do anything except avoid and evade, if he could stand his ground, and the main person that he wanted him to stand his ground against was her. So I do like how it is ultimately resolved, but like waterbending, it's another case of he gets past this fairly quickly and just kind of gets on with it. I understand that for the most part, we're never gonna approach getting into the details of specifically how you go about learning a bending form, in that with Aang we basically never see him actually learn specific new moves and stuff like that. It's just he gets the basics of how to actually bend, and then in the background there's just a lot of training that happens. So it's always going to be that case, and it's just maybe expected to be a little bit more of a struggle for him to kind of finally get that earthbending philosophy down. But I actually want to start off with, I suppose, what Iroh says to Zuko, which is the big amazing takeaway quote from this episode, which is Iroh talking about the four nations specifically, and what it kind of gets across about the nature of each element, but also just the nature of the people of each of the of each of the nations. That he says here, fire is the element of power. The people of the Fire Nation have desire and will and the energy to drive and achieve what they want. Earth is the element of substance. The people of the Earth Kingdom are diverse and strong. They are persistent and enduring. Air is the element of freedom. The air nomads detached themselves from worldly concerns and found peace and freedom. And also they had a good sense of humor. Water is the element of change. The people of the Water Tribe are capable of adapting to many things. They have a deep sense of community and love that holds them together through anything. So immediately just presenting this kind of idea of okay, this of course is kind of speaking generally about the nations. This doesn't apply to absolutely everyone. But a classic example of someone from each of these nations kind of represents these traits. That fire is fundamentally about desire and willpower. The Earth Kingdom is about kind of persistent, enduring survival. Airbending is absolutely about, freedom and peace and kind of creativity also to a degree. Water, yes, element of change, adaptation, yeah, and community, family is very important to them. It all makes complete sense, but also gets across the idea of like how opposite, earth and air are in this case, of just that, um, Aang has to learn to be strong. So a lot of the training that Toph does with Aang is actually strength training, so just that he's kind of more suited to actually having to bend these huge chunks of earth rather than the kind of weightless kind of air that he's used to. And then he has to be, enduring, stubborn almost, when he's kind of not that way most of the time, where he's usually kind of free and flowing. So it's just a complete difference in kind of style. And then, like, obviously with Korra, her struggle element was air, and she, in a way, had the mentality that more was about like more of like a firebender earthbender kind of combo. So that's why she struggled with air. It's not just a case of like, oh, you're from the waterbend, you're from the earth kingdom, so you're going to struggle with air. If you're an earthbender but have a personality that more like is more similar to like a waterbender, of course you're going to struggle with something different. And then it kind of is also fitting as well that Zuko, if fire and water are meant to be the other opposites, that Zuko, in terms of becoming stronger, has to learn a technique that has its basis in waterbending with lightning redirection. But on that side of the story, we first go into basically how you actually generate lightning in the first place. So I like the technical explanation on this side of the story for how this actually works, in that he calls it like the most pure expression of firebending. He calls it the cold-blooded fire. It requires peace of mind. He then goes to talk about the yin and yang energies, positive and negative, and how you actually generate lightning is that if you're skilled enough in firebending, you get a sense of how to separate positive and negative, and as you push them back together, that crashing of the two energies back together creates lightning, and you just have to basically channel that burst of energy out, and that is what lightning is. So it's a really good explanation. And then with that in mind, he goes into how he learned from the waterbenders how to redirect lightning, with regards to like, okay, waterbenders, their main kind of tactic in fighting is kind of redirection in a way. Take a waterbending attack, kind of flow it around your body and like fire it straight back. That's the kind of basic idea, and it's similar with lightning, except it's just channel it up one arm, through the stomach, not the heart. That's the key kind of point in terms of channeling the energy, and then out the other arm. It all fits and works together nicely because, as we'll get into much later on this season, we get into the chakra points and stuff like that, and very conveniently, but also I think absolutely planned. The reason from like the start of the show, the stomach, power and firebending comes from the breath, has always been a case of like the fire chakra point is kind of located there. So like the idea of your breath and your breathing being important, plus your stomach being this kind of like reservoir of energy, it makes complete sense why like a firebender, to kind of contain the energy of like their most energetic attack, lightning, you channel it through your stomach where there's the most kind of capacity to store energy. So not a lot of cool stuff here. And then we do get the reason for why Zuko right now can't actually generate lightning himself, and that is that he has his, of course, inner struggles that he really can't get over. So Zuko can't achieve peace of mind, and thus can't learn lightning generation, the offensive form. And it's one of those ones that still to this day, we've never had confirmation that Zuko ever learns to actually generate lightning. I think it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for him to just never have this technique. I think it makes sense that later in his life, maybe even fairly soon after where we are right now in the comics, that it is a technique he eventually learns to master, because on the other side of the equation, they do establish in this episode that this is a technique that Iroh invented, so Azula wouldn't even know about, so she can't do lightning redirection. But in the comics, she has actually learned that technique basically by herself. So she kind of has, once again, the fact that she can generate lightning, Zuko can't, as an advantage over him right now in the comics. So that's very interesting. And I like that Zuko's really kind of happy he has something that it's a defensive technique, but it is something that counters the big thing that Azula has over him. And then when he goes to like, okay, let's practice it. I want to really actually practically use this. Iroh's like, wait, what? You want me to shoot lightning at you? And he's just like, no, 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 no. If everything goes to plan, you will never actually need to use this technique. And of course, it leads to the big moment with Zuko at the end of the episode, where he goes onto the top of the mountain during the storm and basically asks the sky to like hit him with lightning so he can practice this technique. And I think it very much fits into the idea of like what he said after he failed at the lightning generation, that it blew up in my face like everything always does, that he's still at that point where he feels that just everything he tries to do in the right way just goes wrong for him, and he doesn't know the right direction or approach to have. And even this case where he basically asks to kind of be hurt, it's still the second he asks for it, it goes wrong and doesn't happen. And it's just that sense of like the world is out to get him, yet the second he asks for something like that, it doesn't happen and nothing's going right for him. But really, really well done on that side of the story. The reunion of the two of them, Zuko's training, and the fact that Iroh just immediately is like, no, Azula is crazy. She needs to go down. You need to, learn these techniques to be able to challenge her. It makes sense. But on the other side of the episode, of course, we have the little side plot of Sokka going hunting for food after Fufu cuddly poops and gets stuck in the hole, and the whole karma plot of him, figuring out who he is, but it really just being a big joke and a setup for like someone Aang needs to protect, and a way to force Aang to stand his ground against the mother moose lion, saber-toothed moose lion cub. And I like this scene because you see in the initial parts of this fight, Aang is very much on the move in the fight. He moves out of the way and sends the moose lion kind of flying over Sokka, and it kind of is almost putting Sokka at risk, because like Aang doesn't have the power to just like propel the moose lion like through the air. Then he kind of goes off to distract it, but it still goes after Sokka, and it forces him into a position where, even though he's not directly using earthbending here, he has to go up and just directly challenge the moose lion with airbending. And I like the way they animated it, in that he comes in, just really powerful air, and just kind of blows it back in a direct challenge. He doesn't like direct it over to the side or like evade past it. He uses air, but he uses air in a very direct and kind of confrontational, standing his ground way. And that was enough for Toph to realize that he's got the basics now. He has, in a actual heated situation, stood his ground. And then he goes over to her and confronts her, takes his staff back, and shows a bit of toughness himself, and she respects that. And I like the little reveal kind of afterwards that it was in the end Toph taking Katara's teaching advice to mind, of just with Aang, positive reinforcement does really well, more so than being really harsh and tough. And her kind of being positive in how he handled that Moose Lion Cub situation, and kind of using the fact that he stood up to her as a positive, ended up being just this amazing thing that got him to eventually earthbend in the end. So really, really good stuff there. The other thing, I suppose, at the start of the episode they almost forgot was Iroh and his dream about Lu Ten just as he wakes up, basically. I thought that was really interesting how they handled it. My beloved Lu Ten, I will see you again. There's almost this sense of like, because he's woken up from an injury, like he's in a dream because of an injury, that like he's like, if he dies he'll see Lu Ten again. So I thought that was unique dynamic, because of course we haven't got quite to the scene yet where we get Iroh singing the song yet, even though in Zuko Alone, of course, we got the reveal of what happened to Lu Ten. But here we get a more kind of another present day kind of version of this. Of course, we had back in book 1 towards the end the idea of, like, ever since I lost my son, I think of you as my own. We had the moment where they found out in the past that Lu Ten died. They absolutely, in this group of episodes, are playing this up as a really big point. And I think it's one of those ones at this stage now where you need to actually fill this in. Lu Ten, I think you need to actually characterize. In the same way that, like, the Search comics really added to an episode like Zuko alone, I feel an Iroh's story covered in the comic would add so much to the series as well. Characterizing Lu Ten would be a big thing. The relationship between Iroh and Lu Ten. You could cover the relationship between Iroh and Ozai. Lu Ten and Zuko, if they had any sort of a relationship. Ursa and Iroh is another one. You know, all these sort of dynamics you can cover because Iroh is such an interesting character. Because again, in this episode, they just immediately say here that, like, Iroh has been to the Water Tribe. And not just when we saw him there at the start of the series, but that prior to the series, earlier in his life, he has been to the Water Tribe and has actually studied people from the Water Tribes and learned lightning redirection. Because I absolutely don't interpret this as like, oh, because of the events up in the North Pole or because of the events at the very start of the series, he learned it. It was clearly before this point. So, yeah, there's that. And yeah, by the end of the episode, Aang has earthbending. And they more or less say that, like, he's got the gist of it now. He just has to do the training and master and become use, and basically another thing to add to his arsenal. And it's basically 3 out of 4 done at this stage. Even though they do establish that, like, he still has training to do on water as well as earth before he becomes, like, a master. But within this episode, I think they more or less say Aang is a master waterbender at this point. Because it makes sense that, like, Aang was always the one who was kind of more, like, prodigal at waterbending. Katara devoted herself more to the training, so she became a master before Aang. But now we're, like, roughly halfway through this book. It makes sense that Katara has more or less trained Aang to the point where he is on a master level. But because he has to do other element training, of course, Katara is going to be the water specialist and, for the most part, a better waterbender than Aang. But he's still really strong, right up there as one of the best. So, interesting position. But to end the episode, it's like a really good episode. There's some really good humor throughout, with Sokka and Fufu Cuddly Poops. But also some of the stuff that, like, Toph says, you know, like, you know, Aang says, you know, my staff is a delicate instrument, and she's just like, it's not the only delicate instrument around here, clearly referring to Aang. That was a really kind of cleverly written line. And then, yeah, just the stuff with the elements again, the big quote that I read out there about the different nations, that is definitely one of those, like, the swamp, everything is connected, the stuff we'll get with the guru later on, it's on those levels of the kind of almost philosophies type stuff that the show teaches you, and it's like, yeah, like, whoa, like, Nickelodeon show getting into, like, how different groups of people are and what drives them and stuff like that, and kind of teaching Zuko from the Fire Nation that, no, you can actually learn from the other nations. That's why the Avatar is so powerful, because they have all 4 elements, but they also have the ideals and kind of drive of all the 4 nations to use each element as well. So I like that in this episode Zuko, maybe without realizing it, maybe without actually accepting it, you gain some extra respect for what it is to be the Avatar, because for the most part everyone, like, treats the Avatar as, like, this kind of really important being. It's never been massively clear if Zuko has any sort of respect for, like, this ancient being that, like, is reincarnated and has 4 elements. He just has always just seen, like, Aang is the Avatar, I have to capture him, and he's never really seen Aang as being, like, this special thing. But I think this episode has given Zuko some context to, like, you know, the role of the Avatar in the world is an important one and it exists for a reason, and he now understands through Iroh, who very much has this perspective on all 4 of the nations, that there's something more here. But yeah, solid episode. Not, like, I don't think one of the best, absolute best episodes from the series, but, you know, there and thereabouts, I think. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.